In this lesson, we will be looking at for loops in greater detail. Now, a for loop allows you to iterate over a sequence of objects, and these can be contained in things such as a list or a string, and operate on each of the individual items in that sequence. Now, the general format for using a for loop is to first use the for keyword, followed by a variable. Now this is your target, and it will store each item in the sequence as it iterates over the sequence. So here we have for x in, and then I need to specify my sequence. So I'm going to be using my list, and this contains the numbers 1 through 3. Again, I have to end this line with a colon, and this will start my new code block, which means I need to indent on the next line. And now I'm going to do a simple print statement, just for this example, and I'm going to print out the value in x. When I execute this code, you can see that the numbers 0, 1, 2, and 3 have been printed out. So what's happening in the for loop is that it's iterating over each object in the list. So the first time it goes through the loop, it's going to put the number 0 in our variable x and then print it out. The next time through the loop, it will put the number 1 in x and again print it out, and so on until it reaches the end of the sequence. Now, it is possible to end execution of a list early by using the break keyword, or you can skip iterations by using the continue keyword. An example of using break to effectively end the loop, I will add in a conditional statement. So I'm going to do if x equals 2, break. Now when I execute this, it's only going to print out the numbers 0 and 1. And that's because when it hits the number 2 in my list, it's breaking out of the for loop, so it's ending execution. If I only want to skip the number 2, I can use the continue keyword. And this will move execution back up to the start of our for loop and continue on with the next item. So when I run this, I'll see that the numbers 0, 1, and 3 have been printed out. This print statement was skipped when x equals 2. If I change this now to my string and execute this now, you can see that each character has been printed out on a separate line. And once again, if I'd like to skip, in this case I'll skip the letter A. When I execute this now, I no longer have the A's in the word Maya. Additionally, I can end this loop at the space by using the break keyword. Once again, if I hit enter and run this code, you can see it prints out Maya and then stops. One of the lesser known things about for loops in Python is that you can also use an else statement. So I can do else, and in this case I'm going to do print break not hit. So with an else as part of a for loop, the else command will only be executed if a break statement has never been hit in the for loop. So I'm just going to change this to continue so that we are going to execute this else statement. So when I run this, I now get the line break not hit. And that's because inside of our for loop, a break statement did not occur. So if I change this now back to break, and again execute the code, I'm no longer getting the else code being executed. Now keep in mind that the break command must be executed. It doesn't just have to exist in the for statement. So if I do a test looking for Z or Z inside of my for loop, which we know doesn't exist in MyPython, and I execute this now, you can see that the else statement has been executed. Now you may not be using the else statement with your for loops very often, but it is something to be aware of, and it's good to keep in your bag of tricks. To demonstrate for loops in a simple Maya script, I'm going to be using the template that we created in the if-else lesson. If you recall, this involved getting a list of selected objects in the scene, and then if objects were selected, do something with those objects, otherwise display an error to the user. So right now I'm just using the pass statement as a placeholder, so I don't have any errors in my script. And what I'm going to be doing is replacing this with code that will adjust the positioning of the cubes in our scene based on their name. So if I open up each group, you can see that the names of the cubes are left, middle, and right, with the numbers 1, 2, and 3 appended at the end. And for this, I'm just going to be working with the top level group objects, and then I'm going to be drilling down in my scripts to grab the cube objects. So jumping back into Charcoal, let's see how this is done. Obviously, the first thing we're doing is getting a list of the selected objects. Next, I need to get a list of the children in those group objects. So this is going to be a command that you haven't seen yet. And this is commands.listRelatives. And then I'm going to be passing in my list of currently selected objects, along with the flag children equals true. And what this command is going to do is return a list of all the children for my currently selected objects. So I've selected each of the groups, and when I execute this command on its own, you can see that it returns the child objects for each group. So left 1, middle 1, right 1, left 2, middle 2, and so on. And here I'm just storing this in the children variable. Now the plan of this script is to adjust their position based on the current frame. This means that I need to store the current frame. So this will be using commands.currentTime. Then I'm going to have to query. So query equals true. When I execute this command, this just returns the current frame. So here I'm on frame 1. If I change this to frame 8 and execute the command again, you'll see that it's now returning a result of 8. And with that, I'm ready to create my for loop. So now I can iterate over each of the children and adjust their position accordingly. So I'll start by creating my for loop, the for child in children. And now I'm going to be using the setAttr command. So I'm just going to be storing the attr that I'm going to be changing. And this will just mean less typing later. So I'm going to be adjusting the translate y, which is ty attribute. So when this is executed, attr will be storing the child name, so for example, write3 dot ty, or translate y. And this will update accordingly as we iterate over each child. Next, I'm going to use an if statement. So if child starts with left, then I'm going to be setting its translate y, so commands.setAttr. I need to pass in the attribute name, followed by the value. So the new value is going to be the frame. So the position of all objects that start with left as their name will have their position equal to the current frame. Now I'm going to do an else if, and I'm going to adjust the objects on the right. So child.startsWith right. And this time again, I'm going to be setAttr, commands.setAttr, my attribute name, and this time I'm going to be doing the negative frame. So objects on the right will have their Y position set to the negative frame value. And that should be it. So looking at my current scene, I have row 1, row 2, and row 3 selected. And I'm currently on, let's set this to frame 1. Now when I execute this script, close down my editor, you can see that the cubes have been offset either up or down based on their position. The cubes in the middle haven't changed. To make this a little clearer, I'm just going to create a shelf button. And I'm just going to give this the name ADJ. So now I can close down my editor. And if I change my time and click on my shelf button, you can see that the cube's position has been changed accordingly. And if I use a negative frame, you'll also see that the cube's positions are reversed. This is just one simple example of how you can use for loops in your scripts.